Thank you for taking our invitation and thank you for being here. My name is Amog Rai. I am the managing editor of the DeCypher Journal, and I'm also the research director for the Advanced Study Institute of Asia. So generally, as the convention goes, before we get into the meat and potatoes of our conversation, for those of our listeners, because this is going to be an audio-only interview when it comes out, who is Dr. Jeff Rich? So how would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, Dr. Jeff Rich is a author, a historian. The doctor comes from having a PhD in history, and a former government official. I worked in government, in the sort of provincial state government in Australia for 33 years. But a couple of years ago, I sort of took early retirement and sort of returned in a way to my long-held wish to write and to write about history. And I now do that on a few platforms. You were kind enough to publish some of my writing in your journal. And I also have a YouTube channel and a Substack, jeffrich.substack.com, where I kind of write about world history and encourage people to sort of reflect upon the typical stories we tell about world history, to rethink the world today, I guess. You know, your most recent article is talking about prisoners of geography and security in Asia and those sorts of things. And I think having a good insight into history really helps with those kind of issues. So, yeah, I'm a retired government official who writes about history and world affairs on the internet.
Not just the internet, you also are the author of 3 published books.
Yes.
And you have a Substack that has a very attentive audience, something that just about every aspiring writer can learn from. So thank you.
Thank you.
I welcome you again to the platform. Now, before we get into the intricacies of the history writing of Yuval Noah Harari, a first staging question would be, how do we look at history today? Because we are living in a time of extreme scientific improvement in certain areas. Technology seems to be the new god, and just about everybody is chasing after a particular vision of technology. But the one thing that keeps on popping back up, is history. Just about everybody has an opinion on it. I mean, if you talk to somebody in Silicon Valley, they have an idea about history. If you talk to a new politician, they have an idea of history. God save us, if you talk to any right-wing politician, they have a very interesting idea of history. So as somebody with a doctorate in history, as somebody with an insight in different government fields, why does history matter?
Well, I think history matters because it's about the stories we all tell ourselves about our past. And in a way, the past and the present, I guess, is all that we really know. We don't really know the future. No one really is an expert on the future. All we really know is the past. So we kind of make sense of what's happening to us now and what might happen to us in the future by telling stories about the past. And we do that like in our, autobiographies, our private lives, but also the big sort of, issues of national and international history. So I think it really matters because storytelling and thinking through narratives is just fundamental to how we as humans, despite scientific advances and all the rest of it, it is fundamental to how we actually make sense of the world. And I think really good history has really subtle narratives, just as the real world is much more complex than simplified models. So I think that's why history really matters, because it's this vast storehouse of unique, exceptional, wonderful stories about all the possibilities that are before us. And if we sort of really pay attention to it, then we can learn more about how we came to be the way we are and what might be possible for us in the future.
Right. That was not a leading question, but it was important for the context that we're going to jump into. A second question, just to kind of set it up for the people that are not really coming into it from history or being trained in history. So my second question would be, and you make it very clear in your article, you also make it very clear in the fantastic video that you put out. The thumbnail, or rather the description of the video, would be in the description box of this interview also. What is the difference between large history and conventional history? I'm imagining the history that you got a PhD in would have been a very, very small slice, because academic history cannot be large. But when you look at macro history, Jared Diamond, Guns, Germs, and Steel, or our own topic of conversation today is going to be around Yuval Noah Harari's, which started with Sapiens, a very long look at humanity. Aren't there distinctions, aren't there caveats and red flags that professors of history have outlined just about every time that you would want to do it? So I would want you to reflect a little bit on that, so that the context becomes clear for people who are coming into it. This is not two people who are not bestsellers taking on a bestseller, but these are people who are interested in the study of history, trying to understand the problems with this large narrative of history. Your comments.
I guess one of the things that's really influenced me over time has been, what people variously call global history or world history or transnational history, which has tended to reframe how the big stories of the past have to, what those big stories are, from a kind of, civilization began in Mesopotamia and then bloomed in Western Europe and then finally moved over to America. Those kind of beautiful, compelling stories about, I guess, Western history have, over the last, 50 or so years in academic history, but also popular understanding as, culture and literacy, etc., education as the opportunity to tell the stories of the rest of the world have grown, have really sort of reversed that sort of story. So often, and I guess we all have this instinctive wish to try to understand the big story of humanity. How did we get here? How does our story fit in with the broader story of evolution and all that kind of thing? But the way in which that is told, that extraordinarily long history, extraordinarily long complex history, has been shaped by, I guess, 19th century traditions of very national history and very Eurocentric and United States-centric history. But over the last, 50 years roughly, let's say, through the works of scholars all around the world, that story is breaking down and revealing a much more interesting, more complex, rich, intricate, in a way more wonderful sort of story about history. So does that sort of answer the question, you think? Or
Right. It does. So I was just kind of putting it in as a caveat, because it should not be seen that the attempt here is to look into a specific person, but it's actually the narrative thing that we are.
Yeah. That's right, exactly. And if we just jump ahead to Yuval Noah Harari, he's an exceptionally gifted storyteller. And, I read his book Sapiens, roughly when it came out. And it's a wonderful book in many ways. But I guess it's such a mesmerizing book in a way. You just need to be careful and say, hang on, how does he really know that? And the way he really knows that is he's picked the eyes out of some of these, traditional simplifications of a more complicated story.
That is what I'm coming to.
Yep.
So now we can jump into having done everything that we needed to. Now we are at the meat and potatoes of the conversation. So when you put out the video, first and foremost, I would like to understand, because the video really jump-started this conversation. It led to a lot of comments. I see a lot of comments under your video. People are agreeing with you largely and giving out other names of, macro historians. But the first time when you came across Sapiens, when the book came out, it was a publishing sensation. And for me, because at that point of time, I was working as an ecologist in the Himalayas, when the book came out, and it was recommended to me by somebody who I really respected. And, when I flipped through the book, so as somebody who was doing biology, it was very interesting, because a popular historian, or rather somebody who would become an international phenomenon, was talking about things that we were trying to talk about every day. But it was a very simplistic take. And that's all right, because, it's supposed to be a popular book, which has to go out to a lot of people who might not really be interested in the intricacies of, let's say, evolution. As a historian, what was your first reaction to the book?
Well, I guess the first reaction was it was such a daring, thing to do, to tell this huge sweep of a story, and in the way that he did to do it. So the first reaction was, wow, that's, there was real admiration for that and real engagement and interest in it. And I probably found, in a way, the early part of the book, the part that first drew me in, and it was partly that intersection between biology and history, if you like, or the cognitive science and history, which we probably didn't really address that before, but that is actually a dimension of the Harari book and the debate, I guess, because it's sort of bringing some of those sort of disciplines, some of those issues, reflecting your own interest into the discussion about the past. So I thought it was, really quite exciting. But then as I sort of, went through the book, I would just notice some of the things that I did know a little bit about the story of. And I thought, I don't know, that doesn't quite accord with how I understand it. And particularly as the book progresses, it becomes more, it feels more like there's a model that he's applying to this huge, complex history, rather than drawing a model or a story out of the actual history itself. It feels like, in a way, that it ends up with the kind of result that he wants it to have, and he's plucked the eyes out of a complicated history to tell that sort of story. But so my initial reaction was, this guy is a great storyteller. This is such an intriguing topic. It's wonderful in a way that people are bringing this topic into, broader discussion, popular discussion, in a way that everyone can relate to. But then I would also think, but I know there's a whole lot of distortions there, and I know there are also people who are trying to do the same thing, who've done it with a little bit more I guess, fidelity to the voices of the past.
Right. And this is where the questions that you raise around Harari becomes very pertinent, because one of the most important things that you flag is a lack of fidelity to the scientific literature as well. Of course, there are elements of the historical literature being, let's say, taking a macro look, but the scientific literature being used in a particular way, it might not really posit that particular thought trend. And it would have been fine. It could have been a publishing zeitgeist, and we would not have been talking about. The reason you made the video, and the reason that when I came across the video and I told my team that we should get in touch with you and we should publish it, because I think it's a very important point that you have been able to speak of without getting into personal criticism from any particular position. Because both of us agree that Dr. Harari is an accomplished historian. I have taken a look at his dissertation, and that is actually a very good work on an area that I'm very interested in. But this larger history, and then being followed by Homo Deus, and then speaking engagements, so on and so forth. The challenges around narrativity, the storytelling, it leaves a lot to be desired from the historical source verification, citation, so on and so forth. What really is the challenge? If I were to put it in a different way, what really is the challenge when we talk about this large macroscopic view of history from a particular position? Then that becomes a talking point and is often quoted in the media. What gets lost in this? Because you have a very important point that you make about it.
Yep. Can you remind me what my important point was? I forgot.
So
it was something you were. What were you?
The historian or the future? You specifically talk about it.
Yeah.
That is, you will know a Harari historian or a futurist.
Or a futurist. Yeah. That's right. Okay. Well, I think like a historian I really admire is Felipe Fernandez Amesto, who in a way has written about similar sorts of themes. I mean, he wrote a book called Civilizations, which within, 600 pages encompasses a pretty representative sample of all the civilizations that have ever been on Earth and across all the different environments on Earth, and really flips the understanding of it. But he approaches it not. He sees the role of the historian as offering different, multiple perspectives on a very complex reality, and enabling people to sort of see. I think he sort of describes sort of glimpsing through reeds and sort of getting a different sort of perspectives on what's happening in the past. So it's accompanied with a humility and a compassion and an empathy to really try to understand what's happening there, to make serious claims about big issues in history, but not to fit it into a kind of a model. And I think that was the thing that really struck me as lacking in Yuval Noah Harari. And, in a way, it's sort of, more of a popular science kind of view of history. His great inspiration is Jared Diamond, who was a kind of polymath scientist who then turned his mind to history in Guns, Germs and Steel, and sort of had that kind of I guess more, there's a key driver of human behavior, a key driver of human history, and it is this, and we can see it in the data. I guess it's that parsimonious scientific mindset, whereas I guess the mindset of historians tends to be sometimes to their detriment. It's all terribly complicated and blah 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 blah. But it's more about getting to know a friend in all their weirdness rather than designing a data model to describe what your friend is doing, kind of thing. If I could put it in that sort of human sort of terms, I feel it's a different mode of understanding, very much based in empathy and plurality and complexity. That was what is not strong enough, I think, in Sapiens, and certainly when then Sapiens and Yuval Harari's kind of perspective on the world is then taken to the panel shows and the speaking engagements and the popularization of it all, it falls out. And what we have is this guy has developed, the map of the entirety of human history, and from that map, he can tell us where we're going.
And this brings me to to a very interesting sort of criticism that biologists, I don't know if you've been able to look at that part of the world, but the biologists have some very definite ideas about where this history is going wrong, because in that entire scheme of things, and I'm currently sticking only to Sapiens, it's a very interesting thing that, look, there is no great grand plan. We've all come out from a particular biological reality. And whatever we've been able to do in terms of the cognitive revolution, there are some irredeemable facts of biology which are true. Everything else, basic rights of liberty, different other things that have happened in the world, they are all sort of an after effect. So very easily you can just kind of displace it to a particular thing. And there is this larger process that we have to trust in. It could be the next big thing. It could be AI. It could be, say, the quantum revolution, so on and so forth. As a historian, as a person who takes popular history very seriously, do you also feel that it marginalizes the losers of history in a context that is deeply distressing in times that we live in? Because in my own country, our experience of colonialism, going by the Yuval Noah Harari map, we lost out. So, we should just be sidelined. But I would want to have some opinions about our own history. What is your take on that?
To do the culture biology thing first, I think that's really interesting. And I have looked a little bit at the biology thing, and Felipe Fernandez Amesto has written a few fascinating books about this too, which at a very simple level, talks about the fact that humans are not the only species who have culture. There's a whole range of animals who may not have as much culture but also have culture. So there's this really complicated relationship between culture and biology that is observable within a scientific framework and observable within a historical framework. And I feel Yuval Noah Harari just kind of turns it into we're all just animals and that's it, kind of thing, as if that actually really explains anything. Like, well, what are animals? And then he very much, I guess, repeats the glorious Western colonial story. And the scientific revolution was happened in Europe, and there were no versions of it anywhere else. Democracy, began, I don't know, in ancient Greece, and then somehow transmigrated to Britain and the United States of America, and didn't happen anywhere else. And he does. I mean, I was just checking back on the book earlier today, and he does talk a little bit about the relationship between empire and violence and that kind of thing. But
that's marginal to the entire argument.
Yeah. And it tends to be like, well, this was a bit of an unfortunate side effect of too passionate. He tends to, I guess, associate it with the aspects of modern development he doesn't like nations and empires and that kind of thing, rather than describe the complex story of that. So I think as a source for understanding the both the tragic history of colonialism in India, Asia, other parts of the world, including in Australia, where I live, Harari is really not your guide, and there are better sources than that. And that's such an important aspect even of what's going on in the world today. What happened with colonialism, what happened with decolonization, how nation states or empires sort of what exactly is the relationship between them, all that sort of thing. That it's a real pity that it's not really properly addressed, and nor is the genuine how would I put it, one of the wonderful things about Felipe Fernandez Ernesto's book on civilizations is he treats civilization, or culture, if you like, as a process rather than a hierarchy of, good and bad societies. And I think, Yuval Harari's sort of series of revolutions very much plays into that old idea of, a hierarchy of civilizations. He argues that we now have a global Western civilization that will, at least for some people, sort of leapfrog into this, super state. But when I look around the world, I see a huge complex mosaic of different cultures, different histories, different peoples with suffering and endurance and tragedy and comedy and all the rest of it in their histories. So I think it would be interesting to hear Yuval Harari's perspective on India, but I think we can all learn a lot from India's history, because it is so rich, and it tells us so much about the modern world.
And yet there are so many micro histories, and this is the point that I keep on coming back to, because of course it's understandable as one book cannot address different micro histories, but at least it can leave the space that there was this room for micro history. But after that, and you do get into the detail about the other books that have followed, and congratulations to Dr. Harari's publishing team. The second book was Homo Deus, which is, from a historian's point of view, a bit of a problem, but leaving that be, you have this entire project that looks at a specific way of technological superiority is the answer to just about everything. And conveniently, on the margins of this are things like the pandemic, for example, a pandemic that we just came out of, the pandemic of say, injustice that permeates the power relations and the structures that we are operating within, all of this just becomes a footnote to be expounded on in editorials later. As a person who has looked deeply into this, what do you think are the interesting points that can be taken away from it? But what is it that, as an audience, for people who are going to be listening to this podcast, and I hope that a lot of people listen to it, and people who are going to read you and go back to your video, what is it that they should be looking out for when they are looking at these larger interpretations of history, this mega history? What is it that we need to watch out for?
Well, I guess it always helps to ask, well, how do you know? How does person X know what they want to know?
How do we know that? Sorry for interrupting. How do we know that? Because how do we reach out? So footnotes, endnotes, what specifically should we be keeping an eye out?
Well, absolutely look at footnotes, look at the, I was looking at what was the range of footnotes in Sapiens, and it's pretty skinny, which is okay. I mean, footnotes are not all that popular with publishers these days, but, it's worth looking at, just doing your own sort of common sense test of, well, how recent are some of these publications? How broadly representative of the world are these publications? And in any case, just as if someone was talking in front of you, you can ask, well, what is it in your experience that, or your activities or the process that you've revealed in the book, whether it's research or whatever, that will give you the basis for saying that. And, so when someone like Jared Diamond claims to write I think the subtitle of his book was A Complete History of Everything for 13,000 years or something like that. You say, oh, okay. All right, mate. No worries. As we say in Australia, sure. What would it take to actually be able to do that sensibly? And, there's you can then sort of use your, critical thinking or your common sense questions to just say, well, maybe there are a few things there that I should check or ask some questions about. And then the other thing I think is the kind of, I almost have started thinking of it as kind of the soap opera test. Like, we all are, one of the things humans are great at is, facial recognition. We have this extraordinary capacity to pick out faces in a range of data somehow. It's just somehow our great gifted perception. And in another part of the mental world, we have this extraordinary capacity to pick out narratives as a way of making sense of events unfolding in time. So, and that's why we tell each other stories and all the rest of it. But it also means we also have this great gift for knowing when someone is just offering us a kind of a soap opera story, whatever it is. I can't think of a soap opera story, boy falls in love with girl and then they kiss and make up or something like that, versus a story which is a bit more adult and a bit more complex, the kind of thing you might expect to find in a good novel, a good movie, a good history show, or even a Game of Thrones, television drama kind of thing. It's all a little bit more complicated than simple narratives. So when Yuval Noah Harari presents, the history of whatever it is, 70,000 years through 3 revolutions that all happen in humanity becoming a god at the end, you might just say, hang on, haven't I heard that story before somewhere? So I think, in a way, trusting our own instincts to pick out oversimplified stories is another thing. And then I guess the other thing is the extent to which you actually hear the real voices of history in the histories that people are telling. You don't get a sense of, well, what did people actually say, or what did people actually, what was their actual experience through Sapiens? You get Yuval Harari's account of it. There's no independent voice of the past that's in the book. So if you can't actually hear the voice of the past in someone's history, whether it's through, quotations or, data or archaeological records or whatever it is, if you can't actually feel the reality of this past life in the story that you're being told, then, you should be sort of skeptical about it, I think.
So thank you for this. This was something that connects a lot of the things that you write about as well, and that we were extremely privileged to publish. Two more questions, because we promised you 30 minutes and we have overshot the mark. Sorry about that. But it'll be over in the next 10 minutes.
That's okay.
First question. This is to extend your soapbox analogy a little bit.
Yeah.
What do we do? And this is a problem that a lot of people have, come and ask me as an ecologist or as a former ecologist. Jared Diamond is somebody that you run into because he has a huge footprint in our field. He's a great ornithologist. He was one of the last students of this great German biologist called Ernst Mayr. His papers are everywhere. And he's written books like Guns, Germs, and Steel, The Third Ape, so on and so forth. So you interact with him everywhere. And when, as a non-weird, that's non-Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, the part of the world that I come from, when you try telling the admirers of this kind of historiography that there is something much more complicated than this, just below the surface, it comes with its own halo. For example, Jared Diamond, if I am not wrong, wrote the book on a MacArthur Genius Grant, right? So this book was a product of the Genius Grant. You and I are having a conversation about Dr. Harari, and it could be argued that we don't have anything fresh to offer compared to these guys, because we are just flag problems in this great scheme of historiography that they have devised, which puts our everyday problems as a point on this great cosmic map of what is possible. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the halo effect?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I noticed just on my copy of Sapiens here, of course, that Jared Diamond, there's a quote from Jared Diamond on the front of Sapiens saying tackles the biggest questions of history in the modern world. So the halo effect is sort of, the king is dead, long live the king sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, I guess that's a really interesting question. I guess it's a general question, isn't it, with authority and expertise and the relative, so not just in this field but in many fields. I mean, it was a question, that emerged during the pandemic, didn't it, with people using the halo effect of scientific authority for good sometimes and maybe not so good for other times. And it's I don't know if I really have a great answer, except perhaps we've never been at a time, I think, in human history where more people have had more education, access to information, access to the kind of communication we're having right here, me in Melbourne, you in India, I assume, so there are so many ways to talk it over with people from different perspectives, and I think ultimately that's perhaps the greatest antidote to just, if you notice the halo effect, talk it over with some different people and get some different perspectives on the issue. I mean, going back to what Felipe Fernandez Amesto said about history, which is, all it can really modestly hope to do is, take a few more angles on this complex picture that we're sort of looking at, and then kind of make sense of what that is. So I feel that is perhaps the thing to do to, in a way, practice the virtue of the scientific revolution that Harari celebrates, and say that, well, everyone can get things wrong, and with anything as complicated as human culture or human experience, there's more than one side of the story, so let's just talk about it from multiple perspectives. I think that's, in a very simple sort of ways, perhaps the best one can do, really. And I think there's particular issues, I think, for, people from the global majority, global south, India, etc., in counterbalancing the volume of material that comes out of, the West, from North America particularly. But that also seems to be changing the, just the the emergence of more vocal, more active, more assertive institutes, etc., is helping with that.
Right. That gets me to the last question. And the last question is that in doing all of this, in reading Harari, and because we run a think tank called Asia, so we speak, or we try to understand the processes shaping Asia today. So, industrial revolution, because you brought it up time in and time out. And it's an important revolution, but something like that had happened in China without the industry part. The productivity, just through human labor, was equivalent to what was happening in the early industrial revolution. And you have Martin Jacques, who's a historian of China, who's kind of written about it. And yet all of these things are sidelined in the larger narrative that Harari has put together, because I would imagine due to paucity of time or pages. But this large trend of these larger books coming out from any part of the world hold a specific challenge for us. And that is that we can be co-opted to take part in larger debates that they were never intended for. For example, the decline in demography, or the fertility rate, is something that a lot of the arguments from Harari's magisterial volumes are now finding themselves in these debates. And there is no comment from the historian himself. So what is the role of a public historian today? Because you will know Harari is no longer a professor. He is now, if I might be correct in using the word, an ideologue of history. What should a historian of that stature, what does the public historian do now? Because as you said, we are more connected today. Ideas can flow from one part of the world to another. And yet, it only appears that these large ideas that try to make sense of a larger human experience flow. But all these caveat emptors, that, okay, keep an eye out on this, keep an eye out on that. They seem to be regulated pretty easily. So I would want a reflection on that, because you also do something like that.
When I was in government, I used to have this little motto to myself that if you want to change the culture, you got to contribute to the culture, kind of thing. So at some level, I think people need to just share their ideas in ways that people can connect to. And like I did this video on Yuval Harari, and it's done better than I could have dreamt of in my wildest dreams. And obviously he's a very well-known figure, so that's part of the reason for it. People are curious about him. But I detect in the comments and the responses that people have, there is a lot of hunger there for, what is the other side of the story? And, there are some great historians who are telling a different version of that. Or like you talked to Marie Favreau on your YouTube channel not so long ago. I talk a lot on my YouTube channel and Substack about John Darwin, whose book on the rise and fall of global empires tells a very different, very authoritative, very widely accepted different account of those last 500 years or so. And it's sort of a challenging book, but it's not that hard to read. And so I think people should just get out there, share those more complex stories, and not because I'm just here in my sort of study in my house where I've been since the pandemic seems, but I don't have any institutional position or anything like that, and yet there has been a response to the kind of more complicated stories, I guess, that I've shared on the YouTube channel and the Substack. And I think that's the hope, and that's the role that both professional historians or public historians, but also people who just want to write intelligently about history. I think there is that opportunity before them, and they shouldn't be deterred or fearful of the reputation of people like Yuval Noah Harari. I hope that's true. I hope no one comes and gets me, but they haven't done that so far.
I hope that is absolutely correct. And thank you so much for doing it. It was a pleasure chatting with you. And to the listeners of this, the details of your the Substack page and the video that got all of this started would be available in the description below. And I hope that you continue to write for us and you continue to ponder about these interesting themes.
Will do. Lovely. Thank you. And thank you so much for the work that you do, Amal.
Thank you. All right.